The weight of the velvet-lined box felt like a boulder in Catherine Blackwell's trembling hands as she gazed at the gold cross her father had just ripped from around her neck. Rain lashed against the windows of her family's stately home in Tucumcari, New Mexico, the drops racing down the glass like the tears on her cheeks. "You have brought nothing but shame to this family," Judge Bartholomew Blackwell said, his voice as cold as the November wind howling outside. "No daughter of mine carries a bastard child." Catherine placed a protective hand over her slightly rounded belly. At 22, she had never imagined finding herself in this position, unmarried, pregnant, and now homeless. The father of her child, a traveling salesman who had promised her the world, had disappeared with the summer winds when she told him about the baby. "Father, please," she pleaded. "Where am I to go?" Her mother stood in the corner of the parlor, eyes downcast, silent tears rolling down her face. She would not intervene. She never did when the judge had made his decision. "That is no longer my concern," he replied, turning away from her. "You have until morning to collect your things. After that, you are no longer welcome in this house or in decent society." Catherine spent the night packing what little she could carry, some clothes, her mother's old medical book, and the small amount of money she had saved from selling her embroidery work. As dawn broke over the town of Tucumcari in 1879, she stepped out into the crisp morning air, a single valise in hand, her future as uncertain as the gathering storm clouds on the horizon. The stagecoach deposited Catherine at the edge of town, as far as her meager funds would take her. 5 miles outside of Tucumcari lay a scattering of homesteads and ranches. She had heard that the Double Circle Ranch needed help with cooking and cleaning. It wasn't much, but it was a chance. The walk was arduous, particularly in her condition. 4 months along, she could still conceal her pregnancy beneath her loose-fitting dress, but the fatigue weighed heavily on her. By the time she spotted the weathered sign marking the Double Circle Ranch, the sun was high in the sky, and her throat was parched from the dry desert air. The ranch house sat nestled between 2 sloping hills, a modest but well-maintained structure with smoke curling from the chimney. Nearby, a large barn housed the sounds of horses, and beyond that, cattle grazed in the distance. Catherine took a deep breath and approached the front door, her heart pounding in her chest. Before she could knock, the door swung open, and she found herself face to face with a tall man dressed in worn denim and a faded blue shirt. His brown Stetson was pushed back, revealing sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer storm. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a strong jawline partially hidden beneath a neatly trimmed beard. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked, his voice deep and resonant. "I'm looking for work," Catherine said, straightening her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "I was told the Double Circle might need household help." The man studied her for a moment, taking in her travel-worn appearance and the valise clutched in her hand. "I'm Zachary Xavier, the owner of this spread. Most folks just call me Zach." "And you are Catherine Blackwell," she replied, then winced inwardly at using the name she was no longer entitled to bear. "Catherine Bingham," she corrected herself. "Well, Miss Bingham, it's true I've been looking for someone to help with the cooking and such. My previous housekeeper left to get married last month." His gaze was direct but not unkind. "Have you done this kind of work before?" Catherine nodded, though it wasn't entirely truthful. As a judge's daughter, she had been taught the necessary domestic skills but had always had servants to perform the actual labor. Still, she was a quick learner and desperate. "I'm hardworking and I learn fast," she said, hoping her determination showed through. "I can start immediately." Zach seemed to consider her words, then glanced at the darkening sky. "Storm's coming in. Why don't you come inside and we can discuss the particulars? Relief washed over Catherine as she stepped into the warm interior of the ranch house. The main room was simply furnished but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, sturdy wooden furniture, and bookshelves lined with more volumes than she would have expected on a cattle ranch. "Have a seat," Zach said, gesturing to a chair at the kitchen table. "You look like you could use some rest." "When's the last time you ate?" "This morning," Catherine lied, not wanting to admit that her last meal had been the previous night's dinner at her parents' house. Zach's eyes narrowed slightly, and she had the distinct impression he didn't believe her. Without comment, he moved to the stove and ladled a generous portion of stew into a bowl, placing it before her along with a hunk of bread. "Eat," he said simply. "Then we'll talk business." Catherine didn't need to be told twice. She ate with as much dignity as her hunger would allow, savoring the hearty stew. As she ate, Zach poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. "Now," he said once she had finished, "what brings you all the way out here looking for work?" "Tucumcary's a small town, but I don't recall seeing you before." Catherine hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. In the end, she decided a partial truth was safest. "My family and I have had a disagreement. I need to make my own way now." "I see," Zach replied, though his expression suggested he suspected there was more to the story. "Well, I can offer room and board plus a small wage. The work isn't easy cooking, cleaning, mending, but it's honest. There's a small bedroom off the kitchen you can use." "That sounds more than fair," Catherine said, relief evident in her voice. "There's one more thing," Zach added, his expression serious. "I run a respectable establishment here. I've got 2 ranch hands who bunk in the bunkhouse, and occasionally we get visitors. I expect proper behavior from everyone under my roof." Catherine felt her cheeks burn with shame. If only he knew. "You'll have no cause for complaint, Mr. Xavier." "Zach," he corrected her, "we don't stand on formality out here." That night, lying on the narrow bed in her new room, Catherine allowed herself to cry quietly. The room was simple but clean, with a small window that looked out over the eastern pasture. By the light of a single candle, she examined her new quarters. A bed, a chest of drawers, a small table, and a hook on the wall for her few dresses. It wasn't much, but it was a sanctuary of sorts. Her hand drifted to her stomach, and she whispered a promise to her unborn child. "We'll be all right. Somehow, we'll be all right." The following weeks established a routine. Catherine rose early to prepare breakfast for Zach and the ranch hands Miguel Rivera and Thomas Cooper, both hard-working men who treated her with polite respect. She spent her days cleaning, cooking, and learning the rhythm of ranch life. Zach was often out from dawn till dusk, working with the cattle or tending to the countless tasks that keeping a ranch running entailed. When he was around, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain distance. Still, Catherine occasionally caught him watching her with a puzzled expression, as if trying to solve a mystery. As December arrived, bringing cooler temperatures to the New Mexico territory, Catherine found it increasingly difficult to hide her condition. She took to wearing an apron at all times and loosened her dresses as much as propriety would allow, but she knew it was only a matter of time before her secret was revealed. That moment came sooner than she had anticipated. One evening, as she was preparing supper, a wave of dizziness overcame her. The room spun, and she reached out to steady herself against the table, knocking a stack of plates to the floor with a crash. Zach burst through the door from outside, his expression alarmed. "Catherine, what happened?" She tried to straighten up, but another wave of dizziness forced her to grip the table more tightly. "I'm fine. Just a little light-headed. I'll clean this up right away." Zach crossed the room in 3 long strides, taking her by the arm and guiding her to a chair. "Sit down before you fall down," he ordered, his voice gruff but concerned. As he helped her to the chair, his hand brushed against her stomach, and she saw the moment of realization dawn in his eyes. He stepped back slightly, his gaze moving from her face to her midsection and back again. "You're with child," he said, not a question but a statement. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "I am. How far along?" "Nearly 5 months now." Zach ran a hand through his hair, his expression unreadable. "And the father?" "Gone," Catherine said, her voice stronger now. "He wanted no part of either of us once he knew." Zach was silent for a long moment, and Catherine braced herself for the dismissal she was certain would follow. Instead, he surprised her by kneeling down beside her chair, his eyes level with hers. "Is that why your family sent you away?" he asked softly. Catherine couldn't hold back the tears any longer. "My father is Judge Blackwell," she said, the words tumbling out. "When he discovered my condition, he disowned me. Said I had brought shame upon the family name and was no longer his daughter." "Judge Blackwell," Zach repeated, his jaw tightening. "I know of him. Hard man." "Yes," Catherine agreed, wiping away her tears. "I understand if you want me to leave. I should have told you from the beginning." Zach stood, his expression thoughtful. "Can you still work?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes, of course. I'm with child, not incapacitated." A faint smile touched his lips. "That's what I figured." He gestured to the broken dishes. "I'll clean this up. You finish supper, and then we'll talk." After the meal was prepared and the ranch hands fed, Zach asked Catherine to join him on the front porch. The evening was cool but not uncomfortable, with a blanket of stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. They sat side by side in wooden rocking chairs, the gentle creak of the boards beneath them the only sound for several minutes. "My mother was in a similar situation," Zach said finally, breaking the silence. "My father was a good man, though. He married her when he found out she was carrying me." "Not everyone is so fortunate." Catherine remained silent, sensing there was more to come. "I don't hold with turning people away when they need help most," he continued, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "Your personal situation doesn't change the fact that you're the best cook this place has seen, and you keep a tidy house. As long as you can manage the work, you and your child have a place here." Catherine turned to look at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You're not asking me to leave?" Zach met her gaze. "No, I'm not asking you to leave. In fact, I'm telling you that you're not alone in this, Catherine. Not anymore." The simple declaration brought fresh tears to her eyes, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. Keep making biscuits like the ones you served tonight, and we'll call it even," he replied with a small smile. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, Catherine felt a spark of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, she and her child had found a safe harbor in the storm. As the weeks passed, Catherine's condition became impossible to hide. Miguel and Thomas, to their credit, made no comment when her pregnancy became evident, treating her with the same respectful courtesy as before. If anything, they became more attentive, carrying water and firewood for her without being asked. Zach, too, seemed to take her condition in stride. He insisted she rest more frequently and hired a local woman, Mrs. Hernandez, to come in twice a week to help with the heavier cleaning tasks. When Catherine protested the expense, Zach waved away her concerns. "The ranch is doing well enough," he assured her. "Besides, I can't have you wearing yourself out. Who'd cook my meals then?" There was a lightness in his tone that made her smile. Over the past weeks, she had noticed a gradual shift in their interactions. The polite distance Zach had maintained initially had given way to a more comfortable camaraderie. They often sat together in the evenings, Catherine with her mending or a book, Zach going over his ledgers or plans for the ranch. Sometimes they talked, sharing stories of their pasts or discussing current events gleaned from the weekly newspaper. Other times they simply enjoyed a companionable silence, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional comment. Catherine found herself looking forward to these evening hours more than she cared to admit. There was something about Zach's steady presence that both calmed and intrigued her. He was not a man given to excessive conversation, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. She learned he had inherited the ranch from his uncle 5 years earlier, after working alongside him since the age of 16. Before that, he had grown up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith. He spoke of his parents with affection, though both had passed on years ago. "What about you?" he asked one evening in late January as they sat before the fire. "Before all this, what were your dreams?" The question caught Catherine by surprise. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her dreams that she had almost forgotten she had once had them. "I wanted to be a teacher," she admitted. "I love books and learning. My mother taught me to read when I was very young, and I always imagined passing that love on to others." Zach nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's still possible, you know. Having a child doesn't mean giving up everything else." "Perhaps someday," Catherine replied, though she couldn't quite imagine how. "For now, I'm just grateful to have a roof over our heads and food on the table." "Speaking of the little one," Zach said, gesturing to her growing belly, "have you thought about names?" Catherine smiled, placing a hand on her stomach where the baby had been kicking vigorously. "If it's a girl, I thought perhaps Emma after my grandmother. For a boy, maybe Daniel." "It was my grandfather's name." "Good, solid names," Zach approved. "When is the baby due to arrive?" "April, according to my calculations," Catherine replied. "Though my mother always said first babies often come late." "We should make sure Dr. Simmons knows to expect a call," Zach said. "He's a good physician, though he serves a wide area. I'll ride into town tomorrow and speak with him." The casual way Zach included himself in her plans touched Catherine deeply. She had grown accustomed to thinking of her pregnancy as her burden alone, but Zach consistently reminded her that she was not facing it by herself. As February turned to March, bringing with it the first hints of spring to the New Mexico landscape, Catherine found herself increasingly uncomfortable. Her back ached constantly, and sleep became elusive as she struggled to find a position that accommodated her swollen belly. Despite this, she maintained her duties around the ranch house, though at a slower pace than before. One morning, as she was kneading dough for bread, she felt Zach's presence behind her. Turning, she found him watching her with concern. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said, gesturing to the flour-covered table. "Mrs. Hernandez can come more often if needed." Catherine shook her head. "I'm fine, truly. Keeping busy helps keep my mind off the discomfort." Zach didn't look convinced. "At least let me help you with that," he said, nodding toward the large bowl of dough. "My mother taught me a thing or two about bread making." Before Catherine could protest, he had rolled up his sleeves and was washing his hands at the pump sink. She watched in surprise as he took half the dough and began kneading it with practiced movements. "You're full of surprises, Zachary Xavier," she said with a laugh. "A man should know how to feed himself," he replied with a shrug, though there was a hint of a smile on his lips. "Though I'll admit, nothing I make tastes half as good as what comes out of your kitchen." They worked side by side, the simple domestic task creating a sense of intimacy that Catherine found both comforting and slightly unsettling. There was something about the sight of Zach's strong hands working the dough, flour dusting his forearms, that stirred feelings she had tried to keep firmly at bay. She had sworn to herself, after the betrayal by her child's father, that she would not be so foolish again. Love, she had concluded, was a luxury she could no longer afford. Yet in moments like these, she found her resolve weakening. As if sensing her thoughts, Zach glanced up, catching her gaze. For a long moment neither spoke, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then the moment passed as Miguel appeared at the back door, calling Zach's attention to a matter with the cattle. Catherine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. These feelings for Zach, whatever they were, would lead nowhere good. He had been kind to her, certainly, but kindness wasn't love. And even if by some miracle he felt something for her, what man would want to take on another man's child? No. Better to keep things as they were, employer and employee, perhaps friends, but nothing more. The first week of April brought unexpected challenges. A late-season storm swept through the territory, bringing freezing rain that threatened the newborn calves. Zach, Miguel, and Thomas worked around the clock to bring the most vulnerable animals into the barn, returning to the house only for brief meals and a few hours of exhausted sleep. Catherine worried about them constantly, especially when the temperature dropped further and the rain turned to sleet. She kept hot coffee brewing and meals ready at all hours, watching anxiously each time the men trudged back out into the worsening weather. On the third night of the storm, Zach returned alone, his clothes soaked through, and his face gray with fatigue. Catherine ushered him to a chair by the fire, helping him remove his sodden coat and boots. "Where are Miguel and Thomas?" she asked, handing him a steaming mug of coffee laced with a splash of whiskey. "Staying in the line shack closer to the north pasture," Zach replied, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Too dangerous to make the trip back with the creek rising. They'll be fine there until morning." Catherine noted the way his hands trembled slightly as he raised the mug to his lips, and how he winced when he moved his right shoulder. "You're hurt," she said, moving behind him to examine his shoulder more closely. "It's nothing," he insisted. "One of the Kevs got spooked and knocked me against the fence. Just a bruise." "Let me see," Catherine said firmly, her tone brooking no argument. With a sigh, Zach unbuttoned his shirt enough for her to pull it aside and examine his shoulder. A large bruise was already forming, the skin darkening to an angry purple. "That's more than nothing," she scolded gently. "Stay here. I have some arnica salve that will help with the swelling." She returned with the salve and began to apply it to his injured shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. Zach remained silent, though she could feel the tension in his muscles beneath her fingers. "Thank you," he said finally as she finished and stepped back. "That does feel better." "You should rest," Catherine advised. "There's stew keeping warm on the stove. Eat something, then sleep. The cattle will still be there in the morning." Zach nodded, too tired to argue. He ate the stew she placed before him, then made his way to his bedroom, moving with the stiffness of a man twice his age. Catherine cleaned up the kitchen and was preparing to retire to her own room when she heard a crash from Zach's bedroom, followed by a muffled curse. Without thinking, she hurried to his door and knocked. "Zach, are you all right?" "Fine," came the strained reply. Just knocked over the washstand." Catherine hesitated only briefly before opening the door. Zach was standing by the bed, struggling one-handed to remove his shirt. The washstand indeed toppled over beside him. "Let me help you," she said, moving to his side. "I can manage," he insisted, though the grimace on his face belied his words. "Don't be stubborn," Catherine chided, reaching for the buttons of his shirt. "You do the same for Miguel or Thomas if they were hurt." This reasoning seemed to penetrate, and Zach allowed her to help him remove his shirt, revealing the full extent of the bruising that spread across his right shoulder and down his back. Catherine winced in sympathy. "Sit down," she instructed, guiding him to the edge of the bed. "I'll get more salve." She returned with the salve and a clean cloth, then carefully began to apply the medicine to his injured back. Zach sat quietly, his head bowed as she worked. The intimacy of the moment was not lost on either of them, her hands on his bare skin, the shared silence in the dimly lit bedroom. "Why did you take me in?" Catherine asked suddenly, the question that had been in her heart for months finally finding voice. "You must have known from the beginning that I was in some kind of trouble." Zach was silent for a long moment, and Catherine feared she had overstepped. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "When I was a boy, my mother told me that the measure of a man isn't in how he treats those who can do something for him, but in how he treats those who can do nothing in return." He paused, then added, "Besides, everyone deserves a second chance. Lord knows I've needed a few in my time." Catherine's hands stilled on his back. "And what about now? Do you regret your decision?" Zach turned then, catching her hand in his. "No," he said firmly, his eyes meeting hers. "Not for a single moment." The intensity in his gaze made her heart race, and for a breathless second, she thought he might pull her closer. Instead, he gently released her hand and turned away. "Thank you for your help," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I should get some rest now." Catherine nodded, gathering the salve and cloth. "Of course. Good night, Zach." "Good night, Catherine." As she closed his bedroom door behind her, Catherine leaned against the wall, her heart pounding in her chest. Something had shifted between them tonight, though she couldn't quite define what. All she knew was that her feelings for Zachary Xavier had grown into something far more complicated than gratitude or friendship. The storm finally broke the next day, leaving behind a washed, clean landscape and the promise of spring. The ranch had weathered the worst with minimal losses, thanks to the tireless efforts of Zach and his men. Life gradually returned to its normal rhythm, though Catherine found herself more aware than ever of Zach's presence, the sound of his voice, the way he moved, the rare but transformative smile that sometimes lit his face. As her due date approached, Catherine tried to focus on practical matters. She prepared a small corner of her room for the baby, fashioning a cradle from a large wooden box that Zach had lined with soft padding. She sewed tiny garments from flour sacks and bits of fabric Mrs. Hernandez brought her, each stitch a prayer for her child's future. Zach, for his part, rode into town and returned with a proper rocking chair, which he placed in her room without comment. The gesture brought tears to her eyes, one more kindness in a long string of considerations that made her feel less alone. "The doctor says he'll come as soon as you send word," Zach told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "And Mrs. Hernandez has agreed to stay here when your time comes, to help with whatever you need." "You've thought of everything," Catherine said softly, touched by his thorough planning. "I try to," Zach replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Though I admit babies aren't exactly my area of expertise," Catherine laughed. "Nor mine, despite the circumstances." They fell into a comfortable silence, the gentle rhythm of the rocking chairs creating a soothing backdrop to their thoughts. "Have you written to your family?" Zach asked eventually. "To let them know where you are," Catherine shook her head. "They made it very clear they wanted nothing more to do with me. My father's last words were that I was no longer his daughter." "People say things in anger they don't always mean," Zach observed. "Especially proud men like your father. He might be wondering what became of you. Or he might have happily washed his hands of the disgrace I brought upon the family name," Catherine countered, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Either way, it doesn't matter now. You and this ranch have become more of a home to me than my father's house ever was." Zach turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "I'm glad of that," he said simply. "Very glad indeed." 2 days later, Catherine woke before dawn with a strange, tight feeling in her lower back. She moved about her morning routine as usual, preparing breakfast for the men and seeing them off to their day's work. But as the morning progressed, the discomfort increased, radiating around to her abdomen in waves that became increasingly difficult to ignore. By midday, she was certain her labor had begun. She found Zach in the barn, checking on a mare that had recently foaled. "Zach," she called from the doorway, one hand braced against the frame as another contraction seized her. "I think it's time to send for the doctor." Zach was at her side in an instant, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "How long have you been feeling this way?" "Since early this morning," Catherine admitted, "but it's getting stronger now." Without hesitation, Zach guided her back to the house, his arm strong around her waist. "Thomas," he called to the ranch hand who was mending a saddle nearby. "Ride for Dr. Simmons, then stop by the Hernandez place. Tell them Catherine's time has come." As Thomas hurried to saddle a horse, Zach helped Catherine into the house and to her room where the freshly made bed awaited. "What do you need?" he asked, his calm demeanor belying the concern in his eyes. "Water," Catherine said, breathing through another contraction. "And maybe some clean towels. Mrs. Hernandez will know what else when she arrives." Zach nodded and moved with efficiency, bringing water and towels, stoking the fire in the main room to keep the house warm, and preparing a pot of tea that he insisted she drink to keep up her strength. Through it all, he maintained a reassuring presence, neither panicking nor leaving her to face the increasing pain alone. Mrs. Hernandez arrived within the hour, her weathered face creasing into a smile when she saw Catherine. "Ah, the little one is eager to meet the world, I see," she said, laying a gentle hand on Catherine's abdomen. "Don't worry, Querida. I have helped bring many babies into this world. All will be well." The next few hours passed in a blur of pain and effort for Catherine. The contractions came faster and stronger, each one requiring all her concentration to breathe through. Mrs. Hernandez moved about the room with practiced efficiency, preparing what was needed, checking Catherine's progress, and offering words of encouragement in a mix of English and Spanish. Zach remained in the house, though he respectfully stayed in the main room once Mrs. Hernandez took charge. Occasionally, Catherine would hear his boots on the floorboards as he paced, or his voice as he spoke quietly with Miguel, who had returned from the fields to await news. Dr. Simmons arrived just as the sun was beginning to set, bringing with him his medical bag and a calm, professional manner that Catherine found reassuring. After examining her, he nodded to Mrs. Hernandez. "Not long now," he said. "Everything is progressing as it should." The final hour of labor was the most intense, with Catherine drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. With Mrs. Hernandez on one side and Dr. Simmons guiding her, she pushed when instructed, rested when told, and finally, as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, her child entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the small room. "A fine son," Dr. Simmons announced, placing the squirming infant on Catherine's chest after Mrs. Hernandez had quickly wiped him clean. "Strong and healthy." Catherine gazed down at her son in wonder, tears of joy and exhaustion streaming down her face. He was perfect tiny fingers, a shock of dark hair, and a determined little mouth that already seemed set in concentration. "Hello, Daniel," she whispered, touching his cheek with a gentle finger. "I've been waiting to meet you." After the doctor had examined both mother and child and pronounced them doing well, Mrs. Hernandez helped Catherine wash and change into a clean nightgown. The baby, wrapped snugly in a soft blanket, lay in the cradle beside her bed, his eyes closed in sleep after his momentous journey. "The rancher wishes to see you," Mrs. Hernandez said with a knowing smile. "Shall I tell him to come in?" Catherine nodded, suddenly nervous though she couldn't say why. She smoothed her hair as best she could and adjusted the blankets covering her lap. Zach entered the room hesitantly, his eyes immediately drawn to the tiny bundle in the cradle. He approached slowly as if afraid of waking the sleeping infant. "Catherine," he said softly, his gaze moving from the baby to her face. "You did well. How are you feeling?" "Tired," she admitted with a small smile. "But happy. Very happy." Zach nodded, looking back at the cradle. "He's a fine-looking boy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Strong like his mother." "Would you like to hold him?" Catherine offered, touched by the tenderness in Zach's expression. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by uncertainty. "I don't have much experience with babies," he said. "I might do it wrong." "There's not much to it," Catherine assured him. "Just support his head and hold him close." After a moment's hesitation, Zach carefully lifted the sleeping infant from the cradle, cradling him awkwardly but securely in his strong arms. Daniel stirred slightly, his tiny face scrunching in momentary protest before settling back into sleep. "Hello there, little man," Zach murmured, his expression softening as he gazed down at the child. "Welcome to the world." Something in the way Zach held her son, in the gentle cadence of his voice as he spoke to him, touched Catherine deeply. This man, who owed her nothing, who had taken her in at her lowest point and shown her nothing but kindness, was now looking at her child with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything, Zach. I don't know what would have become of us without you." Zach looked up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "Your family now, Catherine," he said simply. "Both of you. And family takes care of each other." Family. The word echoed in Catherine's heart, filling a void she hadn't realized was there until that moment. Family was what she had lost when her father had cast her out. But perhaps, against all odds, she had found it again here in this ranch house with this quiet, steadfast man. The days following Daniel's birth were a hazy blend of exhaustion and joy for Catherine. She marveled at every aspect of her son, the perfect curl of his tiny fingers, the surprising strength of his grip, the way his face scrunched up just before he began to cry. Mrs. Hernandez stayed for 3 days, showing Catherine how to nurse the baby, how to bathe him in the small metal tub, and how to swaddle him tightly to help him sleep. She was a patient teacher, never judging Catherine's inexperience but guiding her with the wisdom gained from raising 6 children of her own. Zach, meanwhile, kept the ranch running smoothly, ensuring that Catherine had everything she needed without being asked. Fresh water was always available. Meals appeared at regular intervals, prepared by Miguel, who proved surprisingly adept in the kitchen. And the house was kept warm despite the unpredictable spring weather. Most evenings, after the day's work was done, Zach would sit with Catherine and Daniel in the main room, sometimes reading aloud from one of his books, other times just keeping her company as she nursed the baby. These quiet hours became a cherished ritual for Catherine, a time when the 3 of them existed in a bubble of warmth and connection that felt increasingly like the family Zach had spoken of. As April gave way to May, Catherine gradually resumed some of her household duties, though Zach insisted she continue to rest whenever possible. Daniel grew steadily, his newborn fragility giving way to a more robust infancy marked by alert dark eyes and increasingly vocal demands. One afternoon, as Catherine sat on the front porch with Daniel sleeping in her arms, she spotted a familiar figure riding toward the ranch. Thomas Cooper, returning from a supply run to town. As he drew closer, she could see he was carrying more than the usual supplies. A large parcel was strapped behind his saddle. "Afternoon, Miss Catherine," Thomas greeted her as he dismounted. "Got the flour and coffee Mr. Xavier asked for, and this came for you." He indicated the parcel. Catherine frowned in confusion. "For me? Are you certain?" Thomas nodded. "Postmaster was real specific. Said it was addressed to Miss Catherine Bingham at the Double Circle Ranch." Intrigued and slightly apprehensive, Catherine waited as Thomas brought the parcel to the porch. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, with no indication of the sender. "Would you mind holding Daniel while I open it?" she asked Thomas, who looked momentarily panicked at the prospect before cautiously accepting the sleeping infant. Catherine untied the string and carefully unwrapped the parcel. Inside was a beautifully crafted wooden chest, about the size of a large book. Her heart racing, she lifted the lid to find a folded letter atop a collection of baby items: a crocheted blanket, tiny clothes, and a silver rattle that looked familiar. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the letter and began to read. "My dearest Catherine, I pray this finds you well, though I have no right to expect your forgiveness or even your acknowledgement after the way our family has treated you. It was only yesterday that I learned where you had gone, through Mrs. Martin, whose son delivers goods to the ranches outside town. Your father does not know I am writing to you. His pride still prevents him from admitting he was wrong, though I have seen the regret in his eyes when he thinks no one is watching. The house has been so empty without your laughter and your kind spirit. I have included some things for the baby, my grandchild, whom I long to meet. The blanket was yours when you were an infant, as was the silver rattle that my mother gave to you. The clothes are new, made with love during the quiet hours when your father is at the courthouse. Please know that you are in my heart every day. If you can find it in yours to write to me, I would be most grateful. Your father need not know if that is your wish. With all my love, Mother Catherine." Read the letter twice, tears blurring her vision. The thought that her mother had been thinking of her, had been making clothes for Daniel, touched her deeply. She had resigned herself to the complete loss of her family. This unexpected connection felt like a lifeline to a past she had thought forever closed to her. "Everything all right, Miss Catherine?" Thomas asked, looking concerned as he awkwardly patted Daniel's back. "Yes," she replied, carefully folding the letter and returning it to the chest. "Yes, I believe it is." That evening, after Daniel had been fed and settled in his cradle, Catherine showed Zach the contents of the parcel and her mother's letter. He listened quietly as she explained, his expression thoughtful. "Will you write back to her?" he asked when she had finished. Catherine nodded. "I think I will. She's the only grandmother Daniel has, after all, and I've missed her despite everything." "That's good," Zach said, his voice warm with approval. "Family ties are important, even the complicated ones." "What about my father?" Catherine asked hesitantly. "If he were to learn where I am." "This is your home now," Zach said firmly. "You and Daniel belong here as long as you wish to stay. No one, not even Judge Blackwell, can change that." The certainty in his voice reassured her, as did the protectiveness evident in his stance. Zach Xavier might not be a man of many words, but when he did speak, he meant every one of them. That night, by the light of a single lamp, Catherine wrote a long letter to her mother, telling her about Daniel's birth, about the ranch, and about the kindness shown to her by Zach and the others. She described her son's growth and development. Knowing these details would mean the most to a grandmother who had yet to hold her grandchild. What she didn't write about were her growing feelings for Zach, feelings that became harder to deny with each passing day. As spring turned to summer, the ranch settled into a pleasant rhythm. Catherine's strength returned fully, and she resumed her role as housekeeper with Daniel often nearby in a basket or, as he grew more active, on a blanket spread on the floor. Zach had fashioned a sturdy high chair for the dining table, allowing Daniel to join them for meals even before he was ready for solid food. The correspondence with her mother continued, with letters arriving once or twice a month, always when Judge Blackwell was away on circuit. Catherine treasured these connections to her past, even as she embraced her new life at the Double Circle. It was a Sunday in late June when everything changed. The day had been unusually hot, prompting Zach to suggest an evening picnic by the creek where the temperature would be cooler. Catherine readily agreed, packing a simple meal of cold chicken, biscuits, and fresh berries picked that morning. The creek ran along the southern edge of the ranch property, shaded by cottonwood trees that provided a welcome respite from the heat. Zach spread a blanket in a grassy spot, and Catherine settled Daniel on it, watching as he batted at the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves above. "He's growing so fast," Zach observed, his expression soft as he watched the baby. "Seems like just yesterday he was that tiny bundle the doctor placed in your arms." "I know," Catherine agreed with a smile. "Soon he'll be crawling, and then we'll really have our hands full." They ate in companionable silence, enjoying the simple food and the gentle sounds of the creek and birdsong. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Daniel fell asleep on the blanket, his little chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of infant slumber. "I've been thinking," Zach said suddenly, his voice quiet so as not to wake the baby, "about the future." Catherine looked at him, curious. "What about it?" Zach seemed uncharacteristically hesitant, fidgeting with a blade of grass between his fingers. "I know when you came here, it was because you had nowhere else to go. And I want you to know that you and Daniel always have a home at the Double Circle, no matter what." "I appreciate that," Catherine said, wondering where this conversation was leading. Zach took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "The thing is, Catherine, I've come to care for you both, more than I probably should given our circumstances." Catherine's heart began to race, but she remained silent, afraid to hope for what his words might mean. "I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures," Zach continued, his eyes meeting hers with a directness that made her breath catch. "But I do know my own mind and my own heart, and both are telling me the same thing, that I love you, and I love Daniel as if he were my own son." Catherine felt tears welling in her eyes, but before she could speak, Zach held up a hand, asking for her patience as he finished. "I'm not asking for an answer right now. I know you've been through a lot, and the last thing I want to do is pressure you. But I wanted you to know how I feel and to ask if you might consider. If someday, you might consider becoming my wife." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with hope and possibility. Catherine looked at this man who had taken her in when she was at her lowest, who had shown her kindness without expectation of return, who had loved her son from the moment of his birth. And she realized with sudden clarity that her heart had been his for longer than she had been willing to admit, even to herself. "Zach," she said softly, reaching out to take his hand, "I don't need time to consider. I love you too. I have for months, though I was afraid to hope that you might feel the same." The smile that broke across Zach's face was like sunrise after the darkest night, transforming his features with joy. He leaned forward, his hand gently cupping her cheek, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart soar. "Are you certain?" he asked when they finally parted, his forehead resting against hers. "Being a rancher's wife isn't always easy, and I know it's not the life you were raised for." Catherine smiled, thinking of all she had learned and experienced in the months since arriving at the Double Circle. It's a good life, Zach. An honest one, and it's the life I choose with you. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony performed by the circuit-riding preacher who visited Tucumcari once a month. Mrs. Hernandez had helped Catherine fashion a wedding dress from her best white muslin, adorned with lace from a tablecloth Zach's mother had made years before. Miguel and Thomas stood as witnesses, both men scrubbed clean and wearing their Sunday best for the occasion. Daniel, now almost 4 months old, was present in his mother's arms for part of the ceremony, though Mrs. Hernandez took him when it was time for the vows to be exchanged. As Catherine promised to love, honor, and cherish Zachary Xavier for all the days of her life, she felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in a way that transcended physical location. After the ceremony, they shared a celebratory meal with their small circle of friends. Mr. and Mrs. Hernandez had brought tamales and flan, while Miguel contributed a hearty beef stew that was his grandmother's recipe. Thomas, not to be outdone, had ridden into town and returned with a small cake from the hotel's dining room. As the evening wound down and their guests prepared to leave, Catherine found herself standing on the porch with Zach, his arm around her waist as they bid farewell to the last of the company. Daniel slept peacefully in his cradle inside, exhausted from the day's excitement. "Happy, Mrs. Xavier?" Zach asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Very," Catherine replied, leaning into his embrace, "though it still feels a bit strange to hear myself called that." "You'll get used to it," he assured her with a smile. "We have a lifetime ahead of us, after all." That night, as Catherine lay in Zach's arms in what was now their shared bedroom, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than a year ago, she had been cast out by her family, facing an uncertain future with a child on the way and nowhere to turn. Now she was a wife and mother, secure in the love of a good man, with a home and a future bright with promise. "What are you thinking about?" Zach asked softly, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her shoulder. "About how sometimes the hardest moments in our lives lead us exactly where we're meant to be," she replied, tilting her face up to his. "If my father hadn't sent me away, I would never have come here, never have met you." "Then I suppose I owe Judge Blackwell my thanks," Zach said, a hint of wry humor in his voice, "though I doubt he'd appreciate hearing it from me." Catherine laughed softly, then grew more serious. "I've been thinking about writing to him, actually. Not to ask for forgiveness, but to let him know that Daniel and I are well, and that we're happy." Zach considered this. "If that's what you want to do, I support you, but don't be disappointed if he doesn't respond the way you hope. Men like your father find it hard to admit when they're wrong." "I know," Catherine said, "but he's still Daniel's grandfather, and life is too short for such divisions, don't you think?" "You have a good heart, Catherine Xavier," Zach said, kissing her gently. "It's one of the many reasons I love you." As summer gave way to fall, Catherine and Zach settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. The ranch prospered under Zach's careful management, allowing them to hire an additional hand to help with the expanding herd. Daniel thrived in the loving environment, growing from an infant to a curious, increasingly mobile baby who delighted in exploring his world. Catherine's letter to her father went unanswered, though her mother continued to write regularly, sending small gifts for Daniel and news of Tucumcari. In early October, Mrs. Bingham's letter contained an unexpected suggestion she wished to visit the ranch to finally meet her grandson and see her daughter. "What do you think?" Catherine asked Zach that evening, showing him the letter. "She says she can come when Father is away at a judges' conference in Santa Fe next month." Zach considered the question carefully. "If you want her to visit, then of course she should come. This is your home too, Catherine. Your family is always welcome here." The sincerity in his words touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "It would mean so much to me for her to meet Daniel and you." "Then write and tell her we look forward to her visit," Zach replied with a smile. "Though perhaps we should tidy up the place a bit before a judge's wife comes calling." Catherine laughed, glancing around the comfortable but decidedly rustic ranch house. "Perhaps we should, though Mother isn't as concerned with appearances as Father always was." In preparation for Mrs. Bingham's visit, Catherine threw herself into making the ranch house as welcoming as possible. She sewed new curtains for the windows, polished the wooden furniture until it gleamed, and enlisted Zach's help in constructing a proper guest room by partitioning off a portion of the main room with a sturdy screen. The day of Mrs. Bingham's arrival dawned clear and cool, a perfect November day in the New Mexico territory. Zach had arranged for Thomas to meet the stagecoach in town and bring Mrs. Bingham to the ranch, while Catherine prepared a special meal and dressed Daniel in his finest clothes, a tiny shirt and trousers that her mother had sent for his 6-month birthday. When the sound of an approaching wagon reached them, Catherine felt a flutter of nerves. It had been nearly a year since she had seen her mother, a year of tremendous change and growth. Would there be awkwardness between them? Resentment for the role her mother had played or failed to play in Catherine's banishment? But when Martha Bingham stepped down from the wagon, her face lighting up at the sight of her daughter, all of Catherine's concerns melted away. They embraced tearfully, holding on to each other as if to make up for all the months of separation. "Let me look at you, Mrs. Bingham said finally, stepping back to study her daughter. "You look well, Catherine. Happy." "I am, Mother," Catherine assured her. "Very happy." Mrs. Bingham's gaze moved to the infant in Catherine's arms. "And this must be my grandson," she said, her voice softening. "May I hold him?" Catherine carefully transferred Daniel to his grandmother's arms. The baby regarded the newcomer with solemn curiosity for a moment, before breaking into a gummy smile that made Mrs. Bingham laugh with delight. "He's beautiful, Catherine. Absolutely perfect." "We think so," Zach agreed, stepping forward to introduce himself. "Mrs. Bingham, I'm Zachary Xavier. Welcome to our home." Mrs. Bingham studied the tall rancher with evident approval. "Mr. Xavier, I'm very pleased to meet you. My daughter's letters speak highly of you, though I see now that words hardly do you justice." Zach's cheeks colored slightly at the compliment. "Please call me Zach, and your daughter honors me with her kind words, though I assure you I'm the fortunate one in our marriage." The week of Mrs. Bingham's visit passed quickly, filled with long conversations that bridged the months of separation. Catherine showed her mother around the ranch, introduced her to the hands, and proudly demonstrated all of Daniel's new accomplishments. Mrs. Bingham, in turn, shared news from Tucumcari and stories from Catherine's childhood that made Zach laugh and Catherine blush. On the final evening of her stay, after Daniel had been put to bed, the three adults sat before the fire with cups of coffee. There was a companionable silence, broken eventually by Mrs. Bingham's hesitant voice. "Your father asks about you, Catherine," she said quietly, "though his pride won't let him admit it directly." Catherine looked up in surprise. "He does," Mrs. Bingham nodded. "He keeps the newspaper account of your wedding in his desk drawer. I found it when I was looking for his reading glasses one day. And sometimes, when he thinks I'm not paying attention, I catch him looking at the photograph of you that still stands on the mantelpiece." Catherine felt a complex mix of emotions at this revelation: hope, sadness, a lingering hurt, but also a tentative forgiveness. "Do you think he'll ever?" "I don't know," her mother admitted honestly. "Bartholomew has always been a proud man, slow to admit when he's wrong. But he's not a cruel one, despite how it may have seemed when he sent you away. I believe, in time, he might be ready to reconcile. And if he is, Zach added, taking Catherine's hand, we'll welcome him just as we've welcomed you, Mrs. Bingham smiled at her son-in-law, genuine affection in her eyes. You're a good man, Zachary Xavier. I'm glad my daughter found you, or perhaps that you found each other. When Thomas drove Mrs. Bingham back to town the following morning to catch the stagecoach, Catherine felt a sadness at their parting, but it was tempered by the promise of future visits, and the knowledge that the connection with her mother had been restored, stronger perhaps than it had been before her exile. Your mother is a remarkable woman, Zach observed as they watched the wagon disappear down the road. I can see where you get your strength and kindness. Catherine leaned against his shoulder, Daniel balanced on her hip. Thank you for welcoming her so warmly. It meant a lot to me. She's family, Zach said simply, as if that explained everything. And in a way, it did. As the year drew to a close, Catherine found herself reflecting on all that had happened since that rainy day in November when she had been cast out of her father's house. She had lost so much, but gained even more: a husband who loved her with unwavering devotion, a son who brought joy to each day, a home filled with warmth and acceptance. On Christmas Eve, as she and Zach sat before the fire after putting an excited Daniel to bed, he was now crawling everywhere and pulling himself up to stand, much to his parents' pride and occasional alarm. Catherine shared news that added yet another blessing to their abundant life. Zach, she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. It seems Daniel will be a big brother come summer. Zach's eyes widened, then filled with such love and wonder that Catherine felt her heart might burst with happiness. A baby, he whispered, as if afraid to say it too loudly lest the miracle disappear. We're going to have a baby, Catherine nodded, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. Dr. Simmons confirmed it yesterday when I went into town. He says everything looks healthy and strong. Zach gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. I love you, he said against her hair. I love you and Daniel and this new little one, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, Catherine replied, nestling closer into his embrace. You took me in when I had nowhere else to go, gave me a home when I was alone and afraid. You've given me everything, Zach. No, he corrected her gently, tilting her face up to his. We've given each other everything. That's what family does. As the fire crackled in the hearth, and the stars shone bright in the clear New Mexico sky, Catherine Xavier knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her journey had been difficult, marked by loss and pain, but it had led her here to this man, this home, this life filled with love and promise. She had once been banished, cast out for a choice that society deemed unforgivable. But in that moment of greatest despair, she had found a hand reaching out to her, a voice saying, "Not alone." And that had made all the difference. The following summer, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Rose Xavier, a perfect complement to her adoring big brother Daniel. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding its boundaries and its herds under Zach's careful stewardship. Catherine's correspondence with her mother remained steady, with Mrs. Bingham visiting twice a year to spend time with her growing family of grandchildren. And then, on a warm day in September of 1882, a carriage pulled up to the ranch house, bearing an unexpected visitor. Judge Bartholomew Blackwell, older and perhaps a bit humbler than when Catherine had last seen him, stood awkwardly on the porch, hat in hand, asking if he might see his daughter and her family. Zach, ever the protector, asked Catherine what she wanted to do. Without hesitation, she opened the door wide and invited her father in, ready at last to close the circle and complete the journey from banishment to belonging. As Judge Blackwell tentatively held his grandchildren for the first time, his usual stern demeanor softened with emotion. "I was wrong, Catherine," he said quietly, the words clearly difficult for him. "Can you ever forgive an old man's pride and foolishness?" Catherine looked at her husband, who nodded encouragingly, then back at her father. "I forgave you long ago," she said softly. "Life is too short and family too precious to hold onto anger." That evening, as the extended family gathered around the dinner table, Catherine and Zach, Daniel and Emma, Judge and Mrs. Blackwell, Catherine felt a sense of completion, of wholeness. The road had been long and often difficult, but it had led to this moment of healing and reconciliation. Later, as she and Zach stood on the porch watching the stars come out, their children sleeping peacefully inside, Catherine leaned against her husband's strong shoulder. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" he asked, wrapping his arm around her waist. "For saying not alone when I needed to hear it most. For giving me a home when I had nowhere else to go. For loving Daniel as your own. For everything." Zach pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'd do it all again in a heartbeat," he said. "Every moment led us here to this life we've built together. I wouldn't change a single one." As the night wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket, Zachary Xavier knew that she had found not just a home, but a place of true belonging. From the darkness of rejection, she had walked into the light of acceptance, and love, a journey made possible by a cowboy who had opened his home and his heart when she needed it most. And in that moment, under the vast New Mexico sky, their story felt both complete and just beginning, a tapestry of love, family, and second chances that would continue to unfold for all the years to come.